A fine, reddish dust from the harmattan haze settled over the city as Amma Kent walked through the bustling streets, her sandals slapping against the pavement. Her intricate braids, damp from the sudden turn in weather, clung to her neck. She seemed oblivious to the world around her, her gaze distant and unfocused. Her bag hung heavily from her shoulder, her arms limp by her sides. People hurried past, their chatter and laughter a sharp contrast to her silence. Alma was moving, but she was going nowhere. She eventually found a damp bench outside a closed chop bar and sat down heavily, her sigh visible in the humid air. She stared down at her hands, lost in the crushing events of the day. This morning, she'd had a job. She had been 23 minutes late. It wasn't from oversleeping, she'd been awake since dawn, helping her mother with her medication, warming some soup, and waiting for the home care aide who didn't show up. When she finally dashed out, her heart was a knot of guilt. Mr. Adebayo was there waiting. "Alma, we require punctuality. This is your third late arrival. I was attending to my mother." She had a difficult morning, he had offered a hollow apology. This is a business, and that was the end of it. Now, she was adrift in the damp afternoon air. "I am trying," she whispered into the wind. "I am trying so very hard." Then, a movement caught her eye. At the other end of the bench, a man and a small girl were huddled beneath the bar's wide eaves. He had draped his jacket over them both as a shield from the persistent drizzle, but it was a flimsy defense. The little girl, who looked to be about 4, was tucked into his side, her cheeks round and her cornrows beaded with moisture. She glanced up, and for a moment, her eyes locked with Alma's. A pang of empathy tightened Alma's chest. They carried no bags, no sign they were waiting for a tiaro. They were simply enduring the weather. Alma looked away, her heart racing. You do not know them. They could be dangerous. You just lost your livelihood. You have nothing to offer but then, she heard her mother's voice in her memory, when you can help another with the little you have left, that is when your character truly shines. Before she could second-guess herself, she stood up, the sound of her sandals sharp on the wet ground as she approached them. The man looked up, his eyes were exhausted but gentle, weary but not menacing. "Hello," Alma said softly. "I have a small flat nearby. It is dry and warm. I made groundnut soup this morning. If you and your daughter need shelter for the night." The man stared at her, then glanced at his child. After a moment of silence, he asked quietly, "Are you certain?" Alma nodded. "Yes," he exhaled slowly. "Thank you. We are truly grateful." Alma knelt to be at eye level with the child. "Hello there. My name is Alma. What is yours?" The girl burrowed deeper into her father's embrace before whispering, "Zola." Alma offered a warm smile. "It's lovely to meet you, Zola. Let's get you somewhere dry, all right?" The man stood, carefully arranging Zola's jacket. "I am Kwame," he said. "We will not impose, just for the night." Alma nodded once more, guiding them through the damp streets toward her building. Her own sorrow was still heavy in her chest, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of warmth had been ignited. It felt like purpose. Alma's flat was compact but cozy, filled with the inviting scent of ginger and spices from the soup she had prepared hours earlier, back when the day still held promise. The walls were adorned with books and photographs of her and her mother, a testament to the life they shared. Kwame helped Zola out of her damp outerwear. Her small socks were thin and mismatched. Alma noticed immediately and brought out a fresh, dry pair from her own drawer. "Thank you," Kwame said quietly as he straightened up. Alma simply nodded toward the sofa. "You can make yourselves comfortable. I will heat up the soup." As she worked in the kitchen, Kwame took in the modest, well-kept space. Seeing a kitchen cabinet door hanging slightly askew, he knelt and carefully tightened the hinge until the squeak vanished. Alma glanced over. "Oh, you did not have to do that," Kwame offered a faint smile. "An old habit. Mending things gives my hands something to do, she raised an eyebrow but said no more. Zola, now enveloped in one of Alma's oversized shirts, padded toward the kitchen. It smells like my grandmother's cooking, the little girl said shyly. Alma smiled. It's just groundnut soup, but I appreciate that, Zola giggled and went back to the sofa. Alma served 3 bowls at her small dining table, placing a piece of bread beside each one. They ate together, with Zola watching the adults with large, inquisitive eyes. Kwame took a spoonful and nodded in approval. This is delicious, cooking is more affordable than counseling, Alma replied with a wry smile. Kwame let out a quiet chuckle. After a moment, Alma asked, so, what is it you do? Kwame stirred his soup, his gaze averted. I took some time away from work, to sort things out, she didn't push. She recognized the weight in his tone. I was accepted to study journalism at the university, Alma shared. A full scholarship. But then my mother fell ill. So I stayed. I took the receptionist job, Kwame looked at her then with a hint of admiration. That is not insignificant. You put someone else's needs before your own, Alma blinked, it had been some time since she'd received kindness without a hint of pity. And you? She asked. I lost someone. And after that, I wasn't quite sure who I was anymore, Alma nodded in understanding. Yes, I know that feeling. After they finished eating, Zola asked if she could draw. Alma found a box of art supplies in a cupboard. The little girl settled on the floor mat, humming softly to herself. Kwame stood to clear the table. Alma protested, but he insisted on helping. As he washed the dishes, he silently fixed the dripping tap and eased a drawer that always stuck. You have a knack for fixing things, Alma observed. Kwame gave a dry smile. Only when I am unable to fix the larger problems, for the first time all day, Alma laughed. The sound surprised her, but it felt like a ray of sunshine piercing through heavy clouds. Later, when she returned to the living room, she found Zola holding something small and delicate. I made this for you, she said, offering it to Alma. It was a bracelet, woven from bright green twine and adorned with 2 small, polished beads, unevenly but lovingly crafted. Alma knelt down. For me. Zola nodded seriously. You were the first person who smiled at me all day, Alma's chest swelled with emotion. She pulled the little girl into a gentle hug, holding her close as silent tears traced paths down her cheeks. For the first time in a very long while, she felt valued, not for what she could provide, but simply for an act of kindness. Kwame watched them from the sofa. When their eyes met, he gave her a small, sincere smile. That night, after Zola was asleep under a borrowed Kent cloth quilt, Alma sat in the quiet, turning the simple bracelet over in her hands before slipping it onto her wrist. It was awkward, imperfect, and the most beautiful thing she had ever been given. The next morning, the apartment was strangely silent. There was no soft humming, no sound of a child's small feet on the wooden floors. Alma awoke slowly, the pale morning light filtering through her curtains. She stretched, expecting to hear the rustle of movement from the living room or Kwame's low voice offering his thanks once more. But there was nothing. She sat up with a start and looked toward the main room. The blankets on the sofa were folded with perfect neatness. The large shirt Zola had worn was hanging on the back of a chair, clean and smelling faintly of soap. Her heart sank. Alma got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The soup pot was washed and put away, the counter spotless. The room had the unsettling tidiness of a space recently vacated. Then she saw it. On her small table sat a crisply folded white handkerchief. On top of it was a piece of paper, folded in 2. Alma's hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. The handwriting was neat and strong. Thank you. K, that was all. No full name, no contact, just a quiet note from a man who had accepted a night of shelter and left behind a profound silence. She held the note for a moment before unfolding the handkerchief. Tucked inside was a drawing in bold, childish crayon strokes. It was a woman with long braids, smiling and holding something green and round in her hand, the bracelet. Alma recognized herself immediately. Zola had drawn her beneath a sky full of stars, with a tall man and a tiny girl standing on either side of her, all three of them holding hands. Alma sank into a chair, the tears coming freely now. It was only one night, a few bowls of soup, and a place to sleep, but it had meant something. It had meant enough for a little girl to leave this behind. She wiped her eyes, her gaze falling on her refrigerator. After a moment's hesitation, she retrieved the twine bracelet from the table where she'd left it. The green string caught the morning sun. Without a second thought, she pinned the drawing and the bracelet next to it onto the fridge door with a single magnet. She stepped back to look at them, the clumsy, handmade circle and the joyful picture of herself as someone who brought comfort. It looked like a memory of hope. Alma had no idea where Kwame and Zola had gone. She didn't know why they had departed so silently or where they might find shelter tonight. But she knew one thing for certain. They had truly seen her, not as a woman who had been dismissed from her job, nor as a daughter constantly struggling to care for another. They had seen her as someone who mattered, someone who could help. And now her small kitchen, with its worn-out chairs and chipped counters, felt like a sacred space. She sat back down, wrapping her hands around a cup of tea she didn't remember making. The chair across from her was vacant, but in the quiet of that morning, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the start of something she could not yet name, but she knew it was real. The days that followed were a grueling cycle of searching and rejection. Alma walked the city streets with her updated resume, visiting shops, cafes, and office buildings, anywhere with a vacancy sign. But the doors remained closed. She was a university dropout, a former receptionist with limited availability, a woman who carried her exhaustion in the lines around her eyes. At one corporate office, a woman in a sharp suit glanced at her application for a few seconds before looking up. "Frankly," she said, her tone devoid of warmth, "you seem a bit too gentle for this workplace. We require someone with a harder edge, too gentle." The word stuck to her, a stain she couldn't wash away. Alma left the building without a word, a familiar tightness in her chest. That evening, just as the sun was setting, her phone rang. It was the local clinic. Her stomach plummeted. She ran the 12 blocks she couldn't afford a taxi for, arriving breathless and flushed. The nurse met her with a clipboard and a look of practiced sympathy. "Your mother had a minor cardiac event," she explained. "She is stable, but she will require new medications and extended monitoring." Alma could barely process the words. Cardiac event, the phrase echoed in her mind, followed by the terrifying, unanswerable question, how am I going to pay for this? The walk home was a blur. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cool night air doing little to soothe the burning in her heart. When she finally closed her apartment door behind her, the silence was deafening. She dropped her bag and drifted numbly toward the kitchen. Her eyes found the refrigerator, where Zola's drawing still hung next to the little twine bracelet. She stared at it, the misshapen loop, the simple beads, the kind of trinket most people would have politely discarded. Her hand rose, fingers trembling as she reached for the magnet. She wanted to tear it all down, to throw it away and erase the memory of that fleeting moment of connection. It hurt too much to remember that someone, for a brief time, had seen worth in her, only for her to end up more lost than ever. Her fingers brushed the magnet, but her gaze shifted to the crayon drawing. A smiling woman with braids, holding hands with a little girl under a sky of stars. Zola's words echoed in her mind, "You were the first person who smiled at me all day." Her hand fell to her side. She let the magnet settle back into place and slid down to the floor, her back against the cabinets. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as the tears she'd been holding back finally broke free. These were not quiet, frustrated tears, they were raw, heaving sobs of grief, fear, and shame for ever daring to believe that she mattered. "I do not want to give up," she whispered to the empty room, "but I am so tired." Above her, the kitchen light flickered. The bracelet and the drawing remained, untouched. They had weathered her despair, and somehow, so had she. The call came on a Tuesday, just as Amma was returning from her mother's latest checkup. She was in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to make a small pot of stew last the week, when her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but a small nudge of curiosity made her answer. "Good morning, am I speaking with Miss Amma Kent?" The voice was crisp and professional. "This is Ajoa from the Adam Group's Human Resources Department. Our CEO has requested a meeting with you at your earliest convenience." Amma was stunned. I'm sorry, I don't work there anymore." "Yes, we are aware of that," the woman replied calmly. "Nevertheless, the request stands. He asked for you by name." Amma's heart began to hammer against her ribs. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "No," the woman said. "Please, just come in." Tomorrow at 10 a.m., when Amma ended the call, she stood frozen in her kitchen, staring at her reflection in the microwave door, her tired eyes, her simple house dress. "Why would a CEO want to see me?" she murmured. The next morning, she put on her best dress, a simple but clean garment she had carefully ironed. The entire ride on the TRO, her nerves were on fire. She avoided looking at herself in the polished elevator mirrors, feeling utterly out of place in the gleaming corporate tower she once entered every day. A receptionist greeted her warmly and escorted her to the executive wing. Stepping off the elevator, Amma entered a world of plush carpets, modern African art, and the scent of rich, dark coffee. Her stomach twisted. "What am I doing here?" An assistant opened a grand door at the end of the corridor and beckoned her inside. "He is expecting you." Amma stepped into the office and froze. Standing by a vast, polished mahogany desk at the far end of the room was Kwame. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his posture confident and composed. He looked every inch the powerful executive, yet his eyes were the same, gentle, kind, and profoundly familiar. "Kwame," she breathed. Before he could respond, a small voice squealed with joy. "Amma." Amma turned just as Zola launched herself at her, wrapping her small arms around her legs in a hug of pure delight. The little girl looked up, her eyes shining. "Daddy said we might see you again." Amma knelt and hugged her back, blinking away tears of shock. "Hello, my sweet. I had no idea you would be here." Kwame stepped forward, a smile on his face. "She didn't either. I wanted it to be a surprise." Amma stood slowly, still holding Zola's hand. I don't understand." Kwame gestured to a seating area by the large window. "Please, sit with me." They moved to the sofas, and Amma perched on the edge of the cushion. Zola climbed up next to her, resting her head on Amma's arm as if no time had passed at all. Kwame sat opposite them. "I owe you an apology," he began. "And an explanation." Amma could only stare. "I acquired the Adam Group 2 weeks ago," he said. "The deal has been in process for months, but it only recently finalized. I am the new CEO." Amma blinked, trying to make sense of it all. "You're, what?" Kwame gave a small smile. "I took a hiatus from my work after my wife passed away. The night you found us, Zola and I had just been turned away from our temporary lodging. There was a problem with the booking, and we had nowhere to go. I was at my absolute lowest." Amma swallowed, her eyes wide. "You had no idea who I was," he continued. "You just helped. No judgment, no strings attached. That kind of compassion." He trailed off, looking down for a moment. "It reminded me of the man I wanted to be." Amma felt her heart thumping. This stranger she had helped was now the man in charge of the company that had cast her out. "I wanted to thank you properly," Kwame said, his voice soft. "But more than that, I was hoping I could offer you something more." He leaned forward. "Would you consider returning to the company? Not to your old position, but to a role with real meaning." Amma opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked down at Zola, who was tracing small patterns on her arm, smiling as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. And in that surreal, unbelievable moment, it all started to come together. Alma sat quietly on the edge of the plush sofa, her hands clasped in her lap as the reality of the situation settled in. Across from her, Kwame seemed less like a CEO and more like the man she'd met on that rain-soaked evening, weary but kind, guarded but sincere. He let out a slow breath, leaning forward. "My wife's name was Adana," he started, his voice low but steady. "She was the heart of our family. Brilliant, funny, and fiercely devoted to Zola. She had a gift for making everyone feel seen and valued." Alma nodded, sensing the profound grief in his words. "She passed away in a road accident 8 months ago. It was instant. One moment, we were planning Zola's 5th birthday, and the next." His jaw tightened. Everything just stopped. Alma's chest ached for him. "I am so deeply sorry," she whispered. Kwame acknowledged her words with a small nod. "After, I tried to return to work, to lead my old company, to pretend everything was normal. But I couldn't. I felt like an imposter in my own life." He glanced at Zola, who was now engrossed in a picture book across the office. "So, I stepped away. I took Zola and we traveled. We visited places Adana had always dreamed of seeing. I wasn't running away, exactly. I just no longer knew who I was without her." Alma listened, her heart breaking as she understood the fragility she had seen in him that night. "That evening," he continued, "our temporary flat booking fell through. By the time I realized we had nowhere to sleep, the rain had already started. All the nearby hotels were full. We ended up on that bench, and I was just trying to figure out a plan before Zola got too cold." He met her gaze directly. "And then you came along. You didn't know us. You asked for nothing. You just opened your home, shared your food, and made my daughter laugh, something I hadn't heard in weeks. That single night changed my perspective on everything." He leaned forward again. "You reminded me that true compassion still exists. You showed me the kind of leader I aspire to be and the kind of company I want to build." Alma shook her head slowly. "I was only trying to help, and you did," he affirmed, "more than you can imagine." He stood, walked to his desk, and retrieved a folder. Inside was a formal letter of offer. "I bought the Atom Group not just as an investment," he explained, "but because I want to reshape it into an organization that values its people above its profits. And I need someone by my side who truly grasps what that means." Alma looked down at the offer. The salary was more than she had ever dreamed of, for a title she could never have envisioned for herself. "I don't know if I am qualified," she said, her voice quiet. "I never finished university. I was a receptionist." Kwame smiled gently. "Alma, I don't need another executive with a perfect resume. I need someone with genuine heart. Someone who shows up when it matters, someone who opens their door to strangers in a storm." She blinked back a surge of emotion, speechless. After all she had endured, this felt like a dream. "I saw your character when you thought no one was watching," Kwame said. "I believe in that version of you. I hope you will, too." Alma stared at the paper in her hands, then at the man who had once quietly fixed her kitchen drawer. Perhaps this was not an ending after all. Perhaps this was where her story truly began. The promotion was a whirlwind, but Alma threw herself into her new position as head of employee wellness and community outreach with a fierce dedication born from her own experiences. She established programs to support staff facing family illness, childcare challenges, and burnout. She listened. She learned names. She made people feel seen. But even the most genuine kindness can't silence gossip. The whispers began in the staff canteen. "Wasn't she just a receptionist? I heard she never even graduated." "Let's be honest, you don't get a promotion that fast without special arrangements with the boss." Alma tried to ignore it. She would smile, nod politely, and refill her water bottle. But one afternoon, as she passed the photocopier, she heard a man sneer, I guess sheltering a CEO for one night gets you more than a thank you note. The word struck her like a slap. She made it back to her office before the tears came. Closing the door, she sank into her chair, covering her face as doubt washed over her. They think I'm a fraud. They think I don't deserve any of this. Maybe they're right. A gentle knock startled her. She quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. Yes. Kwame opened the door. His gaze fell on her face, and he said nothing. He simply crossed the room, knelt beside her chair, and took her hand. Come with me, he said softly. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer advice. That weekend, they took Zola to the botanical gardens. Alma pushed her on the swings, her laughter mingling with Zola's shrieks of joy. They flew a handmade kite under a vast, clear sky. Zola insisted on drawing them in the red dirt with a piece of charcoal. Daddy, Alma, and me, holding hands, they bought fan ice from a street vendor, and Alma sat on a bench as Kwame handed her a chilled sachet. For a long while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching Zola chase lizards and butterflies with equal fervor. She doesn't see the rumors, Kwame said finally. She only sees you. Alma looked down at her hands. But everyone else does. They see you, Kwame corrected gently, but they don't know your story. He paused. Perhaps it is time they did. That Monday, Kwame sent a company-wide email inviting everyone to a staff assembly on Thursday afternoon. The large auditorium was filled with a buzz of speculation. People exchanged curious glances and a few knowing smirks. Kwame stood at the podium, not in a suit, but in a simple shirt and trousers. He looked more like a colleague than a CEO. He began speaking without notes. Many of you know Alma Kent, he said, his voice calm and clear. Some of you have worked with her, and some of you now work under her leadership. But I want you to know the person she was before all of that. He told them about the sudden rainstorm, about a woman with tired eyes and a kind heart who opened her home to a man and his daughter who had nowhere else to turn. He spoke of how she asked for nothing and expected nothing. She did not know who I was, Kwame said. She only knew we were cold, and she offered us shelter, food, and dignity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a simple bracelet of green twine with two small, polished beads. This, he said, holding it up for all to see, was a gift my daughter Zola made for Alma that night. Zola calls it her thank you bracelet. He looked at it for a moment before placing it gently on the podium. I have carried this with me ever since. Because without this bracelet, I would not be standing here. Without Alma, this company would not be transforming into what it is today. She reminded me that true leadership is not about authority. It is about humanity. A profound silence fell over the room. The whispering was gone, replaced by a deep stillness. Then, one person began to clap. Then another, and another, until the auditorium was filled with thunderous applause. Alma sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, not of pain, but of release. She was finally, truly seen. In the weeks following the assembly, a gentle change settled over the company. The atmosphere grew warmer, more connected. People began to smile at Alma in the hallways, to confide in her, to trust her, not for her title, but for the person they now understood her to be. Her office door remained open. She championed community fundraisers, childcare subsidies, and employee support groups. The invisible walls between departments and people began to dissolve. At home, life was also blossoming. Her mother, whose health had stabilized under the new wellness plan, was full of laughter again, enjoying card games and old movies. Alma felt as if she were finally living, not merely surviving. And then there was Zola. Weekends with Kwame and his daughter became a cherished tradition of hiking, baking, and stargazing. Zola had a habit of adding sprinkles to every dish, including scrambled eggs. One afternoon, she ran to Alma with a crayon drawing. Look, it's our family, she announced, pointing to 3 stick figures. Underneath, she had written, Daddy, Mama Alma, and me. Alma's throat tightened with emotion. Later that evening, as they were reading by the light of a lamp, Zola leaned against her. I prayed to God to send me someone like you, she whispered. Alma blinked back tears. You did? Zola nodded seriously. And I think he listened. Alma glanced across the room at Kwame. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, shared look, everything was understood. At the company's annual awards gala, Kwame stood before everyone. This woman, he announced, his voice ringing with emotion, changed my life and my daughter's life on a night when we had nothing. Then, to the astonishment of the entire room, he knelt down. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he produced a small box containing a beautiful ring. Alma Kent, he said, his voice thick with feeling. You were our hope when we were lost. Will you be our forever home? Tears streamed down Alma's face as Zola ran onto the stage and hugged her. Is this our family now? She asked. Alma knelt, kissed her cheek, and looked at Kwame. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The room erupted in cheers as confetti rained down around them. Their wedding was an intimate, beautiful ceremony by a quiet river, under a canopy of swaying trees. There was no gold or excess, just vibrant bougainvillea, music, and love. Alma walked down the aisle in a stunning Kent cloth gown, her mother at her side. On her wrist, instead of a bouquet, she wore a simple green bracelet made of twine and 2 small beads. During the ceremony, Zola sat between them, holding both their hands. After they kissed, she grinned up at them. We did it, she declared. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they walked hand in hand along the water's edge. Alma, Kwame, and Zola, a family forged not by chance, but by choice. Alma glanced back at the distant city skyline, at the tower where she had once lost everything. What had felt like an ending was, in fact, just the beginning. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of compassion and destiny. It is a beautiful reminder that a single act of kindness can ripple outward, changing countless lives in its wake. Alma opened her door on a rainy night, never imagining she was stepping into a future built not on status or wealth, but on courage, empathy, and love. If this story resonated deep within your spirit, made you believe a little more in the good of humanity, or simply brought a smile to your face, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you heartfelt tales that inspire, heal, and connect us all. Because sometimes, a story is all we need to remember the warmth and kindness the world still holds. Until we meet again, keep your heart open and continue to believe in the power of good deeds.